The forest floor was covered in bones that hadn't been there the night before. Caleb noticed them when he stepped out of the tent and felt something crunch softly under his boot. He froze, weight half-shifted forward, heart already accelerating before his mind caught up. Slowly, he looked down. Pale fragments lay scattered across the soil like spilled chalk. Curved slivers, delicate lattices, smooth rods worn dull by age or weather. Not piled, not arranged, simply everywhere, half sunken into the moss and leaf litter as though the forest itself had exhaled them overnight. The air was cold and perfectly still. Too still. His breath fogged faintly in front of his face, the only movement in a clearing that felt paused between moments. "Lena," he said quietly. She emerged from the tent behind him, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. He just stepped aside. Her hand dropped from her face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bones were small, mostly animal, Caleb told himself. Ribs like delicate cages, narrow jawlines, long thin pieces that might once have belonged to legs. They were clean, dry, free of any sign of violence or decay. No blood, no smell, just bone, bleached almost white against the dark earth. They hadn't been there last night. He knew that with an uncomfortable certainty. He remembered kneeling to set the tent stakes, remembered brushing aside pine needles and damp leaves with his bare hands. There had been nothing beneath them but soil and roots. Lena crouched slowly, as if afraid the ground might shift beneath her. She didn't touch anything. This isn't normal. Caleb scanned the surrounding trees. Tall, dense, their trunks rising straight and indifferent into a canopy that filtered the early light into a dim gray wash. The forest looked the same as it had yesterday. Too much the same. The same crooked birch at the edge of the clearing. The same fallen log furred with moss. The same narrow path leading back toward the trail they'd followed in. Except the path was wrong. It was narrower than he remembered, less defined, as if it hadn't been used in a very long time. "We should leave," he said. Lena nodded, already backing toward the packs. "Now." They moved carefully, avoiding the bones as best they could, though it was impossible not to step on some. Each faint crack made Caleb flinch. The sound seemed to travel farther than it should have, echoing oddly between the trees. As they packed, he became aware of the silence again. No birds, no insects, even the soft rustle of leaves overhead had vanished. The forest wasn't quiet in a peaceful way. It felt restrained, like something holding itself still. They started down the path. Within minutes, Caleb felt the now familiar unease creep back in. The trail sloped gently, but the forest around them didn't change. The light stayed flat and gray. He tried to mark their progress, counting steps, watching for landmarks, but everything blurred together. Every tree looked like another tree. Every turn felt rehearsed. "Didn't we pass that rock already?" Lena asked. Caleb looked. A broad, flat stone sat just off the trail, split by a pale vein of quartz. "I think so," he said. They kept going. 10 minutes later, the rock appeared again. Lena stopped. "No, that's not possible." Caleb checked his compass. The needle wavered, then settled in a direction that made no sense given the slope of the land. His GPS refused to lock onto a signal. The forest floor ahead was darker now. Not shadowed, covered. Bones lay scattered between the trees, more numerous than before, crunching softly beneath their boots. Some were half-buried, others resting atop the leaves as if freshly placed. Caleb noticed then how uniformly aged they all were. No variation, no signs of recent death, just the same dry whiteness over and over again. "This is wrong," Lena whispered. Caleb felt a pressure building behind his eyes, a dull headache that throbbed in time with his pulse. The smell of the forest had changed, too. Not rotten or sharp, just empty, as if the air had been scrubbed of anything alive. They turned back. The clearing appeared less than 5 minutes later. The tent stood exactly where they'd left it. So did the bones. Lena let out a short, broken sound that might have been a laugh. "We walked straight. We didn't turn." "I know," Caleb said. The sun, or whatever passed for it behind the clouded canopy, hadn't moved. Time felt smeared, stretched thin and directionless. They tried another path, then another. Each attempt ended the same way. The clearing, the tent, the spreading field of bones. Each return, Caleb noticed more of them. Not dramatically more, just enough to doubt himself. Enough to wonder if they were always there and he simply hadn't seen them at first. By afternoon, Lena stopped suggesting routes. "We're not lost," she said slowly, sitting on a log that hadn't been there that morning. "We're contained." Caleb didn't argue. The word felt right in a way he didn't like. As dusk crept in, subtle and gradual, like a dimmer switch turned by an unseen hand, the forest grew colder. The bones reflected the fading light, pale shapes emerging from the dark like constellations underfoot. Caleb knelt near the edge of the clearing, staring at a small skull no larger than his palm. Its surface was smooth, almost polished. He turned it over without thinking. Something inside his chest tightened. The back of the skull bore faint markings. Not damage, not teeth marks. Letters. They were shallow, worn by time, but legible. He didn't show Lena. That night, sleep came in fragments. Caleb dreamed of walking the forest alone, his footsteps soft and soundless, the ground beneath him gradually hardening. In the dream, he understood something essential, something obvious, and the understanding filled him with a calm he'd never known. Morning arrived without birdsong. Caleb woke first. He sat up slowly, dread already blooming in his stomach. The bones were thicker now, layered, no longer scattered but subtly arranged, forming pale trails between the trees, curving inward toward the clearing like gentle suggestions. Lena stirred beside him. "Caleb?" He didn't answer right away. As he stood, he noticed how natural the bones felt under his feet. Familiar, as if they belonged there, as if they always had. And with a quiet, sinking certainty, he realized what had been wrong about them all along. They weren't remains left behind by something that hunted here. They were accumulations, gradual, patient. Not the forest feeding on what entered it, but the forest remembering those who stayed. A thick fog rolled in and refused to lift, no matter how long they waited. It arrived without wind or warning, seeping between the trees like a slow exhale. One moment the lake was visible through the trunks, flat, gray, unmoving, and the next it was gone, swallowed by a wall of white that dulled sound and depth alike. Aaron watched it advance from the shoreline, felt the temperature drop against his skin, and knew with quiet certainty that this wasn't the kind of fog that drifted through and burned off with the sun. Settled. By the time it reached their campsite, the world had shrunk to a circle no wider than the fire pit. They waited at first. That felt sensible. Fog came and went in the mountains all the time, especially near water. Aaron had grown up hearing that patience was the safest response to bad visibility. So he sat on a fallen log and listened to the faint lap of the lake somewhere beyond the trees, the sound oddly muted, as if heard through layers of cloth. Beside him, Mara kept checking her watch. "It should be thinning by now," she said. Her voice sounded close and far away at the same time. Aaron nodded, though he wasn't sure she could see it. The fog swallowed outlines, softened edges. Even Mara's face seemed unfinished, features blurring unless he focused on her directly. He had the unsettling sense that if he looked away for too long, she might fade entirely. They had come to the lake to get away from noise. That had been the appeal, a high-altitude basin reachable only by an unmarked trail, surrounded by forest on 3 sides and sheer rock on the 4th. No cell service, no cabins, just water, trees, and sky. Now there was no sky. An hour passed, then another. The fog didn't shift. It didn't swirl or drift. It simply existed, pressing lightly against the trees, absorbing sound. When Aaron snapped a branch for the fire, the crack felt swallowed mid-echo. When he called Mara's name experimentally, his voice seemed to fall straight down at his feet. "This isn't normal," Mara said finally. Aaron stood, rolling stiffness from his legs. "We can head back down the trail." Worst case, we walk slow. Mara hesitated. You're sure you remember it? He did or thought he did. The path had followed the lake's edge before climbing sharply into the trees. Narrow but clear enough. He grabbed his pack and took a few cautious steps forward, extending one boot until it disappeared into white. The ground was there, solid, damp with needles. They moved together, shoulders nearly touching, counting steps out loud without quite agreeing to. 10, 20, 30. Aaron focused on the crunch beneath his boots, the smell of wet bark and cold earth. The forest felt closer now, trunks looming suddenly out of the fog and vanishing again just as abruptly. At 50 steps, Mara stopped. Aaron, she said. Listen. He did. There was no lake anymore. The gentle, constant sound of water against stone had vanished, leaving a silence so complete it made his ears ring. He turned slowly, heart beginning to pound. Behind them, the fog was the same in every direction. No darker patch to suggest water. No open space. We didn't turn, he said. I know, Mara replied. They walked on. Disorientation crept in gradually. The slope of the ground seemed to change without warning, rising when it should have fallen, leveling out when he expected rocks. The forest repeated itself in subtle ways, two birches leaning toward each other, a split pine trunk, a boulder shaped like a slumped animal. Aaron became convinced they'd passed the same landmarks before, though he couldn't say when. At some point, he realized his watch had stopped. Mara still worked, but the time it displayed made no sense. Hours jumped forward between glances. Sometimes it went backward. We should mark our path, she said, voice tight. Aaron tore a strip of orange tape from his pack and tied it to a low branch. The color glowed unnaturally bright against the white. They took 10 more steps. The tape appeared again, tied to a different branch ahead of them. Mara let out a shaky breath. Okay. They turned back. The campsite emerged from the fog as abruptly as it had vanished. Fire pit, log, packs exactly where they'd left them. The fog ringed the clearing like a wall, its edge too smooth, too consistent. Aaron stared at it, a cold pressure forming behind his eyes. We walked straight for at least 20 minutes. And came back in 5, Mara said. They sat. Waiting returned to being the safest option, even as unease gnawed at the edges of Aaron's thoughts. He tried to focus on practical explanations. Altitude sickness, stress, bad weather. But the fog felt intentional in a way he couldn't articulate. Not hostile, just firm. As evening crept in, or what passed for it without a visible sky, the temperature dropped further. Their breaths became clouds within clouds. The fire helped, but its light died quickly in the fog, unable to push more than a few feet outward. That was when Aaron noticed the footprints. They circled the clearing just beyond the firelight, impressions pressed deep into the damp ground. Bare feet, many of them, different sizes, overlapping, all oriented inward. Mara saw them too. She didn't scream. She just sat very still, as if movement might draw attention. They weren't there earlier, she whispered. Aaron nodded. He was certain of it. Later, how much later he couldn't say, he heard voices. Not words. Murmurs. Low and indistinct, drifting through the fog from the direction of the lake that might no longer exist. When he leaned forward to listen, the sounds grew fainter, retreating just out of reach. Mara heard them too. He could tell by the way her shoulders tensed. Do you think? She stopped herself. Never mind. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams bled into waking moments. Aaron dreamed of standing at the edge of the fog, hand pressed against it like glass, shapes moving slowly on the other side. When he woke, the fire had burned low, and the fog pressed closer, its edge now brushing the stones of the pit. Morning did not bring light. The fog remained unchanged, as dense and featureless as before. Aaron stood and felt a sudden, profound certainty settle over him. It's not lifting, he said. Mara looked up at him. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red. Then what do we do? Aaron stared into the fog, into the absence of distance and direction, into a space that felt less like weather and more like a boundary. For the first time since it arrived, a thought occurred to him, quiet, unwelcome, and perfectly formed. The fog wasn't keeping them from leaving. It was keeping something else from coming back.